You can imagine what an honor it is for me to follow the entire day, but particularly the last talk. Today, the ocean no longer is wide, and havoc has spread to all continents. In the century between Waterloo and the outbreak of World War I, from 1815 to 1914, about 2.5 million soldiers fell in battle, but 100 million have lost their lives during the 3 decades from 1914 to 1945. The havoc continues and becomes ever more foreboding. The very existence of the human species is threatened by the present horde of 50,000 nuclear weapons. Yet $450 billion is being spent each year for more arms, a sum greater than the total revenues of all third world countries. Little wonder that Americans have abandoned their traditional isolationism, and that many are actively working for goals such as world government, disarmament, and the nuclear freeze. Last month, for the first time, I had the opportunity to visit Japan and the sites of the atomic bomb explosions in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was just past the anniversaries of those never-before experienced days 38 years ago, on August 6th and August 9th, 1945, an event the significance of which has shifted our way of viewing the world. The memorial museums in those two cities are like a descent into infernal regions, a visit to hell, a hell on earth. And outside the buildings, which house relics of charred and fused human bones found in the debris, of photos and clothes of dead and dying children, faces shocked with pain and disbelief. Outside, in the peace parks where the bomb struck, the grass is growing. I needed that very hopeful reminder that we have another chance. We haven't completely blown it, but we better not forget the awesomeness of mankind's power for destruction. It is with this vivid experience immediately behind me, and with this opportunity to share with you some enlightening thoughts of authors worthy of your attention, that I speak with you today. Marilyn Ferguson, the author of The Aquarian Conspiracy, published in 1980, explains well this phenomenon which has come to be called the paradigm shift. She writes, "New perspectives give birth to new historic ages. Humankind has had many dramatic revolutions of understanding, great leaps, sudden liberation from old limits. We discovered the uses of fire and the wheel, language and writing. We found that the earth only seems flat. The sun only seems to circle the earth. Matter only seems solid. We learned to communicate, fly, explore. Each of these discoveries is properly described as a paradigm shift, a term introduced by Thomas Kuhn, a science historian and philosopher, in his landmark 1962 book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Kuhn's ideas are enormously helpful, not only because they help us understand how a new perspective emerges, but also how and why such new views are invariably resisted for a time. A paradigm is a framework of thought, from the Greek paradigma, or pattern. A paradigm is a scheme for understanding and explaining certain aspects of reality. Although Kuhn was writing about science, the term has been widely adopted. People speak of educational paradigms, paradigms for city planning, the paradigm shift in medicine, and so on. A new paradigm involves a principle that was present all along, but unknown to us. It includes the old as a partial truth, one aspect of how things work, while allowing for things to work in other ways as well. By its larger perspective, it transforms traditional knowledge and the stubborn new observations, reconciling their apparent contradictions. The new framework does more than the old. It predicts more accurately. The problem is that you can't embrace the new paradigm unless you let go of the old. You can't be half-hearted, making change bit by bit. The new paradigm is not figured out, but suddenly seen. Now, new paradigms are nearly always received with coolness, even mockery or hostility. Their discoveries are attacked for their heresy. For historic examples, consider Copernicus, Galileo, Pasteur even. As Kuhn pointed out, those who worked fruitfully in the old view are emotionally and habitually attached to it. But the new paradigm gains ascendance. A new generation recognizes its power. And when a critical number of thinkers has accepted the new idea, a collective paradigm shift has occurred. And then the process repeats itself. As experienced by an individual, the paradigm shift might be compared to the discovery of the hidden pictures in children's magazines. You've all seen these pictures. You look at a sketch that appears to be a tree and a pond, then someone asks you to look more closely, to look for something you had no reason to believe was there. Suddenly, you see camouflaged objects in the scene. The branches become a fish or a pitchfork. The lines around the pond hide a toothbrush. Nobody can talk you into seeing the hidden pictures. You are not persuaded the objects are there. Either you see them or you don't. But once you have seen them, they are plainly there whenever you look at the drawing. You wonder how you missed them before. Growing up, we experienced minor paradigm shifts, insights into the principles of geometry, for instance, or a game, or sudden broadening of our political or religious beliefs. Each insight enlarged the context, brought a fresh way of perceiving connections. The opening up of a new paradigm is humbling and exhilarating. We were not so much wrong as partial, as if we had been seeing with a single eye. It is not more knowledge, but a new knowing. In most lives, insight has been accidental. We wait for it, as primitive man awaited lightning for a fire. But making mental connections is our most crucial learning tool, the essence of human intelligence, to forge links, to go beyond the given, to see patterns, relationships, and context. Having found a core of strength and sanity within, those who have learned that they can trust themselves are more comfortable about trusting others. Those who are cynical about change are usually cynical about themselves and their own ability to change for the better. Transformation, as we shall see, requires a certain minimum of trust. In her powerful concluding chapters, Ferguson describes the planetary family, a concept familiar to Baha'is. She writes, "The wider paradigm of relationships and family transcends old group definitions. The discovery of our connection to all other men, women, and children joins us to another family. Indeed, seeing ourselves as a planetary family, struggling to solve its problems, rather than as an assorted people and nations, assessing blame or exporting solutions. This could be the ultimate shift in perspective. Human beings have a kind of optical illusion," Einstein once said. "We think ourselves separate rather than part of the whole. This imprisons our affection to those few nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle to embrace all living creatures. Nobody achieves this completely, but the striving itself is part of the liberation. Rich as we are, together we can do anything. We have it within our power to make peace within our torn selves and with each other, to heal our homeland, the whole earth. Those of us born into the broken earth paradigm have two choices. We can go to our graves with the old view, like the generations of die-hard scientists who insisted there were no such things as meteorites, or germs, or brain waves, or vitamins. Or we can consign our old beliefs unsentimentally to the past and take up the truer, the stronger perspective. At first glance, it may seem hopelessly utopian to imagine that the world can resolve its desperate problems. Yet there have been remarkable advances as well. We have had a paradigm shift about the whole earth. We know it now as a jewel in space, a fragile water planet, and we have seen that it has no natural borders. It is not the globe of our school days with its many-colored nations. Most people, whatever their philosophy about how to get there, want a warless society in which we are all fed, all productive, and fulfilled. We are changing because we must. Now, historically, peace efforts have been aimed at ending or preventing wars, just as we have defined health in negative terms, as the absence of disease. We have defined peace as non-conflict, but peace is more fundamental than that. Peace is a state of mind, not a state of the nation. Without personal transformation, the people of the world will be forever locked in conflict. And war is unthinkable in a society of autonomous people who have discovered the connectedness of all humanity and who are unafraid of alien ideas or alien cultures, who know that all revolutions begin within and that you cannot impose your brand of enlightenment on anyone else. Another author, Ken Wilber, in his astounding and exciting explanation of human evolution called Up from Eden, published in 1983, this year, points the direction of development in his title, Up from Eden, rather than the legendary fall from paradise. He describes the earliest period of human evolution as a time when the self and the natural environment were not clearly and sharply differentiated. It was the primal Eden of instinctual harmony with nature. physical and biological nature. Then at the next stage, at the next major stage, the self peeled, this is his term, the self peeled the physical, natural world off of itself and transcended that lowest of all levels. However, at that point, the self was basically just a body with little or no mind, no verbal mind, language. Then when the verbal mind eventually emerged and evolved, the self gained a relative freedom from the body's instincts, emotions, and drives. The self could postpone mere instinctual discharges and operate linguistically upon the world, transcend the simple present of the body's senses by remembering and anticipating. Then at the next stage, the self, now he calls as mental ego, could finally differentiate itself clearly from the body. The self then became introspective. It was aware of, and therefore somewhat transcended, its own thought processes. Wilber says we are now at the point where the mind itself is starting, like the environment and the body before it, to crystallize out in consciousness and peel off of the self-sense. And there, he says, rests evolution today, poised midway between matter and God. Must be time. I cut. Courageously, Wilber then tackles what he calls the central problem which has always faced critical social and political theorists. That problem is, why are men and women unfree? In the West, the answers have fallen into two large categories. One locates the cause of unfreedom in objective forces. The other locates it in subjective factors. The first began largely with Rousseau, continued through Marx, and today forms the basis of what is loosely called liberal political views, as well as all forms of humanistic psychology and philosophy. That view is, men and women are born essentially free, essentially good and loving, but are initiated into a social and political world, an objective world, that itself not only teaches but perpetuates social inequality, oppression, and ill will. Although people are endowed with obvious differences in talent, intelligence, and initiative, there is such a vastly unfair distribution of wealth that this distribution cannot be accounted for solely on the basis of subjective differences, but must be due to an objective political superstructure that allows some favored individuals to exploit and suppress the unsuspecting. Now, since the objective world is to blame for unfreedom, then if the situation is to be improved, the objective world must be significantly altered. For both the political and psychological wings of this group, evil results from repressing a prior or innate goodness. Now, the second group, Wilber says, runs from Hobbes and Burke and includes Freud and today's political conservatives. They say men and women are unfree, not so much because of objective social institutions, but because of something in their very natures. Psychologically, this view maintains that humans are born, to use Freud's particular phrasing, with three and only three desires: for incest, for cannibalism, and murder. Whereas for the first group, evil was repressed goodness, for this group, goodness is repressed evil. Man is born nasty, and the good you get out of him is only by suppressing the beast. Politically, this view maintains that inequality and social injustice are inevitable. So, if institutions are relatively fair, relatively democratic, and relatively humane, don't tamper with them, since odds are high that things will only get worse. Now enter then our third group, represented by the mystics, who say that men and women are unfree because there exists a belief in the existence of a true self in the first place. We are not to repress or unrepress the self, but rather undermine it, transcend it, see through it. First of all, it is not true, as the humanist Marxists would have us believe, that a self can exist without repression or oppression. Wherever there is other, there is fear. Wherever there is self, there is anxiety. In politics, the Marxist argument will eventually run itself out. Revolution after revolution will leave the self in anxiety and in pain. While it is true that much good can and already has come from a fairer distribution of nature's bounty, the fundamental problems and fears remain untouched because the structure of awareness itself remains unchanged. At the same time, it is not man's instincts that undo him, but his psychological appetites. And those appetites are a product of boundary, not of biology. The boundary between self and other causes fear. The boundary between past and future causes anxiety. The boundary between subject and object causes desire. And whereas biology cannot be destroyed, boundaries can be transcended. The boundary between self and other is the terror of living. The boundary between being and non-being is the terror of dying. As long as men and women are slaves to their boundaries, they will be caught in battles. The aim of the mystics, the religious aim, is to deliver men and women from their battles by delivering them from their boundaries. The discovery of the ultimate whole, God, is the only cure for unfreedom. This is the prescription offered by the mystics. For men and women are unfree not primarily because of horrid appetites or oppressive institutions, but because they manufacture both of those forms of unfreedom as a substitute for transcendence. E.F. Schumacher, the author of the now famous Small is Beautiful, which was written 10 years ago, wrote another philosophical and practical book on man's relation to the world called A Guide for the Perplexed. He says, people keep clamoring for solutions for the problems of society, and they become angry when they're told that the restoration of society must come from within and cannot come from without. Yet, he writes, it may conceivably be possible to live without churches, but it is not possible to live without religion. That is, without systematic work to keep in contact with and develop toward higher levels than those of ordinary life, with all its pleasure or pain, its sensation and gratification, refinement or crudity, whatever it may be. The modern experiment to try to live without religion has failed. And once we have understood this, we know what our postmodern tasks really are. The art of living is always to make a good thing out of a bad thing. Only if we know that we have actually descended into infernal regions where nothing awaits us but the cold death of society and the extinguishing of all civilized relations, can we then summon the courage and the imagination needed for a turning around. This, then, leads to seeing the world in a new light. Now I want to turn specifically to the Baha'i concept of the evolution of world unity. And here I'm using the words of Shoghi Effendi, who has been quoted throughout this conference. And since I wrote this paper before I got to the conference, I didn't know, just in case I included Shoghi Effendi. Just as the organic evolution of mankind has been slow and gradual and involved successively the unification of the family, the tribe, the city-state, and the nation, the revelation of God at various stages in the evolution of religion has been slow and progressive. Indeed, the measure of divine revelation in every age has been adapted to and commensurate with the degree of social progress achieved in that age by a constantly evolving humanity. I'm going to skip because my time is short, but you know how Shoghi Effendi describes the theme of Jesus, which is focused primarily on the redemption of the individual. The next stage of religious revelation through Muhammad to the nation state. And the revelation of Baha'u'llah, whose supreme mission is none other but the achievement of the organic and spiritual unity of the whole body of nations, should, if we be faithful to its implications, be regarded as signalizing through its advent the coming of age of the entire human race. Shoghi Effendi says every system, short of the unification of the human race, has been tried, repeatedly tried, and been found wanting. Wars again and again have been fought, and conferences without number have met and deliberated. Treaties, pacts, covenants have been painstakingly negotiated, concluded, and revised. Systems of government have been patiently tested, have been continually recast, and then superseded. Economic plans of reconstruction have been carefully devised and meticulously executed. And yet, crisis has succeeded crisis, and the rapidity with which a perilously unstable world is declining has been correspondingly accelerating. The whole of mankind is groaning, is dying to be led to unity. That wonderful quote that you have in your packets from Shoghi Effendi, that let there be no mistake, the principle of oneness of mankind, you know? Imagine that I have read that to you. The principle of the oneness of mankind as proclaimed by Baha'u'llah carries with it no more and no less than a solemn assertion that attainment to this final state in this stupendous evolution is not only necessary but inevitable. Dr. Laszlo, wherever you are, that its realization is fast approaching, and that nothing short of a power that is born of God can succeed in establishing it. And that's why we're here. Now our time has come to an end, and I thank you for your patience in listening. I'm far more at home writing poetry than writing speeches, and I don't know if that's a strength or a weakness, but the words you've heard from me today are the speech of others, the true thinkers and lovers of humanity. Their voices should be heard and heeded. The world has waited long enough. Thank you.